Dr. Sage Winters pressed her fingertips against the cool glass of her apartment window, watching the early morning mist rise from the streets of Manhattan below. The city was waking up, but she had been awake for hours, as she often was these days. Sleep came in fragments now, interrupted by dreams of arrangements she needed to create, of families she needed to comfort, of a voice she could no longer hear. 3 years. It had been 3 years since Elena died, since her twin sister's laughter had been silenced by a drunk driver on a rainy Tuesday evening. 3 years since Sage had discovered that all her training as a grief counselor couldn't prepare her for the hollow ache that never quite left her chest. The feeling that half of her soul had been torn away, she turned from the window and moved through her apartment, noting how the morning light fell across the dozens of small potted plants that lined every available surface. Lavender for peace, rosemary for remembrance, jasmine for hope. Each plant had been carefully chosen, carefully tended. They were her silent companions, her therapy, her way of bringing life into spaces that sometimes felt too quiet. The irony wasn't lost on her, Dr. Sage Winters, grief counselor extraordinaire, who helped others navigate the turbulent waters of loss, couldn't seem to find her way back to joy. She could guide families through their darkest hours, could create flower arrangements that somehow conveyed what words couldn't express, could hold space for others' pain with infinite compassion. But when it came to her own healing, that remained as elusive as morning mist. Her phone buzzed softly on the kitchen counter. A text from Riverside Memorial, the funeral home where she volunteered her floral therapy services every week. Emergency arrangement needed for viewing at PM. Family specifically requested your healing touch. Can you help? Sage's fingers moved automatically across the screen. Of course. I'll be there by noon. She moved to her small home workshop, a converted bedroom where she kept her professional supplies. But as she opened her flower cooler, her heart sank. The delivery she'd been expecting from her supplier hadn't arrived. The cooler was nearly empty, just a few stems of grocery store roses, and some wilted baby's breath that wouldn't create the kind of arrangement that could truly comfort a grieving family. This had been happening more frequently lately. Her regular suppliers were reliable but predictable, offering the same commercial flowers that filled every other arrangement in the city. What made Sage's work special, what made families specifically request her healing touch, were the unique varieties she'd been receiving for the past 6 months. Flowers that seemed to have been chosen specifically for their therapeutic properties. Varieties she'd never seen before that somehow conveyed exactly the right emotion for each situation. The mysterious deliveries had started appearing after she'd mentioned her frustration in a late-night post on a grief counseling forum. She'd written about how hard it was to find flowers that truly spoke to the complexity of loss, varieties that went beyond the standard funeral arrangements. The next morning, she'd found a box outside her door with no return address, filled with the most extraordinary blooms she'd ever seen, night blooming cereus for renewal after devastation. Black-eyed Susans that seemed to glow with inner light for hope in darkness. Forget-me-nots in shades of purple she'd never seen before, each petal seeming to whisper promises of eternal love. And with each delivery came a small card written in elegant script, containing only a quote about flowers or healing, never a signature. Sage had tried everything to identify her mysterious supplier. She'd stayed up late hoping to catch the delivery in progress, had asked around at local flower markets, had even hired a private investigator who came up empty-handed. Whoever was providing these miraculous blooms was either very good at staying, hidden or had access to flowers that simply didn't exist in any catalog or garden center she could find. She moved to her desk and pulled out a folder thick with the cards that had come with each delivery. Her fingers traced over the elegant handwriting as she read through some of her favorites, Where Flowers Bloom, So Does Hope, Lady Bird Johnson, The Earth Laughs in Flowers, Ralph Waldo Emerson, A Flower Cannot Blossom Without Sunshine, and Man Cannot Live Without Love. Max Mullery quote seemed chosen specifically for her, as if someone understood not just her work but her heart. The handwriting itself was beautiful, flowing like calligraphy, but with small imperfections that suggested it came from a human hand, not a machine. Sometimes there were tiny smudges, as if the writer had paused, lost in thought. Sage found herself wondering about the person behind the flowers almost constantly. In quiet moments between clients, she'd imagine what they might be like. Were they a fellow grief counselor who understood the power of the right flower at the right moment? A botanist with access to rare varieties? An eccentric collector who grew unusual specimens? In her more fanciful moments, she imagined someone who understood loss the way she did, who had found their own path to healing through nurturing growing things. She pictured gentle hands selecting each bloom with care. Someone who understood that white lilies weren't just white lilies when placed in the hands of a mother saying goodbye to her child, but symbols of the pure love that death couldn't touch. The phone rang, pulling her from her reverie. The caller ID showed Riverside Memorial, Dr. Winters. This is Janet at the front desk. I have some wonderful news about your delivery situation. Sage's heart lifted. Yes? We just received a call from someone who said they heard about your emergency need through. Well, they weren't entirely clear about how they heard, but they have exactly what you need. They said they'd have flowers delivered within the hour, specifically selected for the family you're helping today. Did they give a name? Sage asked, though she already suspected the answer. No. They just said to tell you that sometimes the most beautiful gardens grow in the shadows, and that today's arrangement should include Japanese camellia for deep longing and white chrysanthemums for truth and devoted love. Sage's breath caught. Those were exactly the flowers she would have chosen if she'd had access to them. Japanese camellia was one of the rarest varieties for expressing profound longing, and white chrysanthemums, while common in some cultures, were nearly impossible to find in New York in their pure symbolic form. Did they? Did they say anything else? Just that they hoped the flowers would bring peace to both the family and the arranger. After she hung up, Sage found herself staring out the window again, her heart racing with a strange mixture of anticipation and something deeper. For the first time in 3 years, she felt truly curious about another human being. Not as a counselor analyzing a client, not as a professional networking with colleagues, but as a woman wondering about a mysterious soul who seemed to understand her in ways she'd never been understood. She pressed her palm against the window glass, watching her breath fog the surface. Somewhere in this vast city was someone who knew exactly which flowers could heal a broken heart, who understood that grief wasn't just sadness, but a complex tapestry of emotions that needed different colors, different textures, different meanings to fully express. Someone who signed their messages with quotes about love and hope, but never their name. Someone who somehow knew that she needed those specific flowers today, for that specific family, in that specific moment of their grief. Journey, someone who understood that the most beautiful gardens grow in the shadows. Sage moved away from the window and began preparing her tools for the arrangement she would create. But for the first time in months, she wasn't just thinking about the family she would serve today. She was thinking about the mysterious florist who seemed to understand her heart better than she understood it herself, and wondering if perhaps, just perhaps, she wasn't the only one yearning for connection in this vast, lonely city. The morning light grew stronger, casting long shadows across her workshop. And somewhere in those shadows, Sage found herself believing, for the first time in 3 years, that beautiful things could still bloom from unexpected places. The delivery arrived exactly 1 hour later, just as promised. But instead of the usual unmarked box left outside her door, this time Sage heard a soft knock. She rushed to answer it, hoping finally to meet her mysterious supplier, but found only a young courier with a clipboard and a large, carefully wrapped package. Dr. Winters. Signature required for this special delivery. Sage signed quickly, her hands trembling slightly with anticipation. Who sent this? What company? The courier shrugged. Anonymous sender. Paid in cash. All I know is I picked it up from the 14th Street station entrance. He glanced at his clipboard. Oh, and I was told to make sure you got this envelope first, before you open the flowers. He handed her a cream-colored envelope with her name written in that now familiar elegant script. Sage clutched it to her chest as the courier disappeared down the hallway, leaving her alone with her racing heart and burning curiosity inside her apartment. She set the flower package aside and carefully opened the envelope. The card inside was different from the others, longer, more personal. Dr. Winters, today's arrangement contains flowers that have never seen sunlight, yet they carry more warmth than any garden bloom. They grow in a place where most people would see only darkness, but I see sanctuary. Like you, I believe that the most profound beauty often emerges from the deepest shadows. The Japanese camellia speaks of deep longing, not just the family's longing for their lost loved one, but perhaps other longings that deserve to be honored. The chrysanthemums carry truth, the truth that healing happens in its own time, in its own way, and sometimes requires the gentle understanding of a kindred spirit. I hope today's work brings you the same peace you bring to others. With deep admiration for your gift, a fellow cultivator of Hopesidge read the message 3 times, her pulse quickening with each pass. This was more than a flower supplier's note, it was personal, intimate even. Someone had been watching her work, understanding not just her professional needs but something deeper. The phrase "other longings" made her cheeks warm with an emotion she hadn't felt in years. She carefully unwrapped the flowers, and her breath caught in her throat. The blooms were extraordinary, unlike anything she'd ever seen. The Japanese camellias were a deep, velvety red that seemed to glow from within, their petals so perfect they looked almost unreal. The white chrysanthemums were pristine, each flower head full and symmetrical, but with an otherworldly quality that made them appear to shimmer in the morning light. But it was the filler greens that truly amazed her. Instead of the usual fern and eucalyptus, the arrangement contained varieties she couldn't identify, silvery leaves that seemed to move in non-existent breezes, delicate vines with tiny flowers that actually seemed to pulse with gentle light, and what appeared to be moss so velvety it begged to be touched. As she worked, creating the arrangement for the grieving family, Sage found herself thinking not about death and loss, but about mystery and possibility. Each stem seemed to have been chosen with impossible care, each leaf positioned to complement not just the other flowers, but her specific arranging style. Whoever had prepared this bouquet knew her work intimately. The arrangement came together like a symphony, each element harmonizing perfectly with the others. When she stepped back to admire the finished piece, Tears sprang to her eyes. It was beautiful beyond words, a perfect expression of love that transcends death, of hope that blooms even in darkness. By the time she arrived at Riverside Memorial, word had somehow spread about the special arrangement. Janet at the front desk gasped when she saw it, and even Mr. Henderson, the stoic funeral director, stopped in his tracks. "Dr. Winters," he said quietly, "in 30 years of this business, I've never seen anything like that. It's it's as if the flowers are actually glowing." The viewing went beautifully. The family was deeply moved by the arrangement, the mother taking Sage's hands and saying through tears, "It's perfect. It's exactly what Mom would have wanted." "How did you know?" But all day, Sage found herself distracted by thoughts of her mysterious supplier. During quiet moments, she'd find herself staring at the arrangement, wondering how anyone could grow such extraordinary flowers. The more she studied them, the more convinced she became that these varieties didn't exist in any conventional sense. That evening, after the service, Sage made a decision. She was going to find this person, even if it meant camping out at every flower market in the city. The courier had mentioned picking up the package at the 14th Street station. That was a start. She took the subway to 14th Street, though she felt a bit foolish as she did. What exactly was she planning to do? Ask random people if they knew a mysterious flower supplier? Post flyers, seeking anonymous botanist with beautiful handwriting? But as she emerged from the station, Sage found herself walking not toward the flower district but in the opposite direction, following an impulse she couldn't name. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows between the buildings, and she found herself thinking about the phrase from the card, "The most beautiful gardens grow in the shadows." She wandered through side streets, past construction sites and abandoned lots, drawn by something she couldn't articulate. The city around her seemed different somehow, more alive with possibility. She noticed flowers growing in unexpected places, tiny blooms pushing through cracks in the sidewalk, vines climbing fire escapes with determination, window boxes overflowing with varieties that shouldn't thrive in the city's harsh environment. As evening approached, Sage found herself in a part of the city she'd never explored before. The buildings were older here, many of them abandoned or under renovation. Street lights were fewer, creating pools of shadow between patches of warm lamplight. And there, in the growing dusk, she began to notice something extraordinary: flowers growing everywhere, not the hardy urban survivors she was used to seeing, but the same impossible varieties that had been appearing in her deliveries. A Japanese camellia bush thriving in a narrow alley where no sunlight ever reached. White chrysanthemums in perfect condition despite the late season. Growing in what appeared to be pure concrete, Sage followed the trail of impossible blooms like breadcrumbs in a fairy tale, her heart pounding with excitement and disbelief. The flowers led her down increasingly narrow streets, past buildings that seemed to exist in their own private twilight, and then she heard it: music, not the typical city sounds of traffic and sirens, but actual music. A piano played with skill and deep emotion. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, something she didn't recognize, but that spoke to her soul in the same way the mysterious flower cards did. The music seemed to be coming from beneath her feet. Sage looked around, disoriented. She was standing next to what appeared to be an old subway grating, the kind that allowed air to circulate in the tunnels below. But this grating was different. It was surrounded by more of those impossible flowers, growing in careful patterns that suggested deliberate cultivation rather than happy accident. She knelt beside the grating, pressing her ear close to the metal. The music was definitely coming from below, and with it, the faint but unmistakable scent of growing things, rich earth, blooming flowers. The green smell of a thriving garden. An underground garden. The realization hit her like a bolt of lightning. Of course, someone had created a garden in the abandoned subway tunnels, a secret sanctuary where impossible flowers could grow away from the harsh realities of the city above. Her mysterious supplier wasn't shopping at flower markets or growing in traditional greenhouses. They were cultivating miracles in the shadows beneath the city. Sage stood up, her mind racing. She needed to find a way down there, needed to solve this mystery that had been consuming her thoughts for months. But as she looked around for a subway entrance, she realized she was completely lost. The streets around her were unfamiliar, and night was falling rapidly. She pulled out her phone to get directions, but the screen showed no signal. Somehow, in following the trail of flowers, she had wandered into a part of the city that existed outside the normal grid of connectivity and convenience. A flutter of panic rose in her chest, but it was immediately replaced by something else: excitement. For the first time in 3 years, she was on an adventure. For the first time since Elena's death, she was actively pursuing something that brought her joy rather than just fulfilling her obligations to others. The piano music swelled from beneath her feet, and Sage found herself smiling in the growing darkness. Tomorrow, she would figure out how to find her way back here in daylight. Tomorrow, she would solve the mystery of the phantom florist. But tonight, she would stand here in the shadows surrounded by impossible flowers, listening to beautiful music played by someone who understood that the most extraordinary beauty often bloomed in the most unexpected places. As she finally turned to find her way back to familiar streets, Sage carried with her the certainty that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Someone was out there, someone who saw beauty where others saw darkness, who created miracles in abandoned spaces, who understood her heart through the language of flowers. Someone who was, perhaps, as lonely as she was. The thought sent a warm shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cool evening air and everything to do with the sudden, startling realization that she was no longer content to wonder about this mysterious person from afar. She was going to find them. Sage spent the entire next day trying to retrace her steps from the evening before, but the city seemed determined to hide its secrets from her. Every street she remembered turned out to lead somewhere different in daylight. Every landmark she thought she recognized proved to be in the wrong location. It was as if the path to the underground garden existed only in twilight, visible only to those who approached with the right kind of yearning in their hearts. By Thursday evening, she was ready to admit defeat when another delivery arrived. This time, the flowers were accompanied by something unexpected: a small hand-drawn map. The drawing was exquisite, rendered in the same elegant hand that wrote her cards. It showed a route through the city streets, marked with tiny illustrations of the specific flowers she should watch for at each turn. Japanese camellias here, night blooming cereus there, until the path led to a small X marked next to what appeared to be an old subway entrance. The bottom of the map. A note for a fellow cultivator who understands that some gardens can only be found by those willing to get lost first. Sage's hands trembled as she studied the map. This was it, an invitation, a way into the mystery that had been consuming her thoughts. But it was also something more. Someone had spent hours creating this beautiful guide specifically for her. Someone who had been watching her fumble around the city looking for them. Someone who wanted to be found. She arrived at the designated meeting spot just as the sun was setting, clutching the map and a small flashlight. The subway entrance marked on the drawing was there exactly as promised, though it was clearly abandoned. The stairs leading down were blocked by a chain-link fence that bore official city notices about closed for renovation, authorized personnel only. For a moment, Sage hesitated. She was a law-abiding citizen, a professional counselor who had never so much as jaywalked. But as she stood there in the gathering dusk, surrounded by the impossible flowers that marked this as the right location, she realized that some discoveries required a leap of faith. The fence had a small gap where it connected to the stair railing just large enough for a determined person to squeeze through. As Sage slipped past the barrier, she noticed that the edges of the gap were wrapped in soft cloth, as if someone had patted them to prevent injury. Another sign that she was expected. The stairs led down into darkness, but every few steps, small battery-powered lights had been placed along the walls, creating a gentle path through the shadows. The air grew cooler as she descended, carrying with it the increasingly strong scent of growing things. And then she heard it again, the piano music. Clearer now, echoing through the tunnel ahead. Sage emerged from the stairway into what had once been a subway platform. But it had been transformed into something that took her breath away. The entire space had been converted into a garden, and like anything she had ever seen or imagined, grow lights hung from the ceiling in carefully planned configurations, creating pockets of different intensities and colors of light. The old train tracks had been covered with rich soil and planted with flowers in neat, organized rows. But these weren't just any flowers, these were varieties she had only dreamed of. Blooms that seemed to exist outside the normal laws of botany, purple roses that actually seemed to glow with their own inner light, orchids in colors that shifted subtly as she watched, vines heavy with flowers that chimed softly in the underground breeze created by a sophisticated ventilation system. And everywhere, the varieties she had been receiving in her deliveries, growing in abundance in this impossible underground paradise. The piano music was coming from deeper in the tunnel, where the platform curved out of sight. Sage walked carefully through the garden, afraid to disturb anything in this magical space. As she moved, she began to notice plaques next to some of the flower beds, each one containing information about the therapeutic properties of the plants, night-blooming cereus. For those who have lost hope but are ready to believe in renewal, Japanese camellia. For expressing longing too deep for words, moonflower. For healing that happens in darkness and solitude. Each plaque was signed with the same elegant handwriting from her cards. And many included personal notes about how the flowers had helped specific people through difficult times. This wasn't just a garden, it was a living pharmacy for broken hearts, tended by someone who understood that different griefs required different remedies. As Sage rounded the curve of the platform, she saw him. He was seated at an old upright piano that had somehow been transported into the tunnel, his back to her as his fingers moved across the keys with practiced grace. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that caught the light from the grow lamps above. His shoulders moved with the music, and even from behind, she could sense the deep emotion he was pouring into the melody. The piece he was playing was heartbreakingly beautiful, something that spoke of loss and longing, but also of hope that refused to die. It was the perfect soundtrack for this underground garden, this secret sanctuary where impossible things bloomed in the shadows. Sage stood frozen, afraid to interrupt but unable to leave. This was him, her mysterious florist, the person who had been reading her heart through flowers for months. He was real, not just a fantasy she had constructed from elegant handwriting and impossible blooms. As if sensing her presence, the music gradually slowed and softened, finally coming to rest on a single, sustained chord that echoed through the tunnel like a prayer. The man's hands remained on the keys for a long moment before he slowly turned around, Sage's breath caught in her throat. He was younger than she had expected, probably mid-30s, with intelligent dark eyes and features that would have been aristocratic if not for the vulnerability written across them. His face showed the kind of sensitivity that came from deep pain that had been transformed into compassion. When their eyes met, she saw in them the same recognition she felt in her own heart, the startling awareness of meeting someone who understood. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, filled with months of unspoken connection. With all the emotions that had passed between them through carefully chosen flowers and handwritten cards. Finally, he stood up slowly, as if movement required enormous effort. When he spoke, his voice was soft, cultured, with just a hint of a tremor that suggested speaking aloud was not something he did often. "Dr. Sage Winters," he said, and even her name sounded like music in his voice. I wasn't sure you would come. I had to," Sage said simply. "Your flowers. They've been speaking to me for months. I had to know who understood grief the way you do." He smiled then, an expression so genuine and warm that it transformed his entire face. "My name is Theodore Blackwood, but down here, in this place, most people would call me Ghost, because I live in the shadows now, because I exist in a world that most people can't see." He gestured to the garden around them. "Because I speak in flowers instead of words most of the time." Sage looked around the incredible space, her mind struggling to process the scale of what he had created. "How long have you been growing flowers down here?" 3 years, Theodore said quietly. 3 years since I stopped being able to exist in the world above. 3 years. The same amount of time since Elena died. Sage felt something shift in her chest, a recognition that went beyond coincidence. "What happened 3 years ago?" she asked gently, her counselor instincts recognizing someone who carried deep wounds. Theodore was quiet for a long moment, his fingers absently playing with the stem of night blooming serious. "I was an actor, Broadway. I had just been nominated for a Tony for my role in The Garden of Earthly Delights. The night of the nomination party, there was an accident during the performance. A light rig fell, almost killed 3 people. It was my fault." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I had asked for them to adjust the lighting for my big number. If I hadn't been so concerned about how I looked on stage, if I hadn't requested that change, it wasn't your fault," Sage said immediately, her heart aching for the pain she could hear in his voice. "Rationally, I know that. The investigation cleared me completely. Equipment failure, they said. But knowing something and feeling it are different things, aren't they, Dr. Winters?" Sage nodded, understanding completely. "What happened after?" "I couldn't go back on stage, couldn't even be in rooms with more than a few people. The anxiety attacks were debilitating, so I disappeared. Found my way down here to these abandoned tunnels, and slowly I started growing things. First, just to have something to do with my hands. Then, because I realized that flowers could say everything I couldn't." He walked over to a section of the garden where white chrysanthemums bloomed in impossible perfection. "I started researching floriography, the Victorian language of flowers. Then I began studying which varieties had therapeutic properties, which ones could actually help people heal. This became my stage, my performance. Instead of speaking lines to an audience, I grow flowers that speak to individual hearts, and you found my work somehow." Theodore's cheeks colored slightly. I I may have been following your posts on the grief counseling forums for months. Your frustration about finding the right flowers for your arrangements, your insights about how different losses require different types of beauty to heal them. You write about grief the way I used to write about characters with deep understanding and infinite compassion, the realization that he had been watching her, understanding her through her written words, sent a warm flutter through Sage's chest. So you decided to become my mysterious supplier. I decided to try to help, he said simply. I have access to flowers that don't grow in traditional gardens, varieties I've cultivated specifically for their healing properties. And you have the gift of arranging them in ways that actually heal hearts. We're a partnership, even if it took you months to realize it. Sage walked closer to him, studying his face in the gentle light from the grow lamps. Why reveal yourself now? You could have kept delivering flowers anonymously forever. Theodore was quiet for a moment, his eyes focusing on something beyond her shoulder. When he looked back at her, there was something different in his expression of vulnerability that made her heart race. Because reading your words, seeing how you use my flowers to heal others, it's been healing me too. For the first time in 3 years, I've been feeling less like a ghost and more like a person who might have something to offer the world again. He paused, taking a shaky breath. And because I realized that I wasn't just growing flowers for your arrangements anymore, I was growing them for you. The confession hung between them in the garden air, fragrant with the scent of impossible blooms. Sage felt her heart do something it hadn't done in 3 years. It opened, like a flower turning toward sunlight. Theodore, she said softly, testing his name on her lips. It felt right, like a word she had been waiting her whole life to say. Will you? Would you like to see the rest of the garden? He asked, his voice hopeful but uncertain. There are sections I've never shown anyone, flowers I've been growing specifically with your work in mind. Sage smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. I would love that. But Theodore, you can stop calling me Dr. Winters. My friends call me Sage. His answering smile was radiant. Sage, he repeated, as if savoring the sound. Like the herb for wisdom and healing, exactly like that, as Theodore led her deeper into his underground paradise, pointing out the special properties of each impossibly beautiful variety. Sage felt something she had thought lost forever beginning to bloom in her chest. Not just curiosity about this fascinating gentleman, but something warmer. Something that made her pulse quicken and her cheeks flush for the first time since Elena's death. She was feeling the stirrings of attraction, of possibility, of a future that might hold more than just professional fulfillment and quiet solitude. In this garden that grew in shadows, illuminated by artificial light and tended by a man who spoke in the language of flowers, Sage Winters was discovering that her heart was not as closed as she had believed, and judging by the way Theodore's eyes lit up when she laughed at his stories about particular flowers, by the way he moved closer to her as they walked through his garden, by the way his voice grew softer and more intimate as the evening progressed. She was not the only one discovering that some feelings, like some flowers, could bloom even in the deepest shadows. Over the following weeks, Sage found herself returning to Theodore's underground garden every evening after work. What had begun as curiosity about her mysterious flower supplier had evolved into something far more profound. Long conversations that stretched late into the night, shared meals eaten by lamplight among the blooms, and a growing intimacy that both thrilled and terrified her. Theodore was unlike anyone she had ever met. His mind was quick and poetic, capable of finding connections between seemingly unrelated things the way grief resembled the dormant period before a bulb bloomed. How healing happened in layers like the petals of a rose slowly opening. His years on the stage had given him an actor's ability to understand and express emotion. But his time in solitude had deepened that understanding into something almost mystical. "Tell me about your sister," he said one evening as they sat together. On a bench he had built beside a patch of forget-me-nots that actually seemed to glow with their own soft blue. Light.it was the first time anyone had asked about Elena directly, without the careful distance that most people maintained when discussing loss. Sage found herself able to talk about her twin sister not just as a tragedy to be processed, but as a whole person who had filled her life with joy. "Elena was everything I'm not," Sage said, her voice soft with memory. "Where I'm cautious, she was fearless. Where I plan everything carefully, she lived on impulse. She used to say that I was the roots and she was the flower that we needed each other to be complete." Theodore listened with the focused attention he gave to his plants, as if every word was important. "What did she do that made you laugh?" The question surprised Sage. Most people asked about the accident, about how Elena died. Theodore was asking about how she lived. "She had this way of finding magic in ordinary moments," Sage said, smiling at the memory. "She would declare random Tuesday afternoons adventure days and drag me to places I'd never have gone on my own. Art galleries in abandoned warehouses, underground speakeasies that served tea instead of cocktails, pop-up gardens in empty lots. She said that life was too short to wait for official permission to have experiences. She sounds like she would have loved this place," Theodore said, gesturing to the garden around them. "She would have been fascinated by you," Sage admitted, then blushed at her own boldness. But it was true. Elena would have been enchanted by the mysterious man who grew impossible flowers in subway tunnels and spoken poetry. "What would she think about you being here with me?" Theodore asked quietly. Sage considered the question seriously. "She would say that I've been hiding in my grief for too long. That I've been using my work with other people's loss as a way to avoid dealing with my own healing." She looked at Theodore, struck by a sudden realization. "She would say that finding you is proof that beautiful things can still happen if I'm brave enough to let them." Theodore's eyes went soft. "Are you brave enough?" The question hung between them like a flower on the edge of blooming. Sage felt her heart race as she realized that this was a moment of choice, a crossroads where she could either retreat back into the safe isolation of the past 3 years or step forward into something unknown and potentially wonderful. "I'm trying to be," she whispered. Theodore reached over and gently took her hand in his. His fingers were long and graceful, stained with soil from working in the garden, warm and slightly calloused from playing piano. The simple contact sent electricity through Sage's entire body. "I haven't touched another person in 3 years," he said softly. "Not since the anxiety started. But with you, everything feels possible again." Sage looked down at their joined hands, marveling at how right it felt. "I haven't wanted anyone to touch me since Elena died. I felt like I didn't deserve comfort. But this feels like coming alive again," Theodore finished. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, hands entwined, surrounded by the soft glow of the impossible flowers. The air was filled with evening blooming scents, jasmine and night blooming cereus, honeysuckle and something ethereal that Sage couldn't identify, but that made her feel like she was breathing in starlight. "Play something for me," she said eventually. Nodding toward the piano, Theodore hesitated. I haven't played for an audience in 3 years. Even an audience of one. I'm not an audience, Sage said gently. I'm just me, Sage, someone who finds your music as beautiful as your flowers. He studied her face for a long moment, then slowly stood up, still holding her hand. Come with me then. Sit beside me while I play. They walked together to the piano, and Theodore guided Sage to sit on the bench beside him. She could feel the warmth of his body next to hers, could smell the clean scent of soap mixed with the green smell of growing things that seemed to cling to his clothes. What would you like to hear? He asked, his hands hovering over the keys. Something that sounds like how this garden feels, Sage said. Something that sounds like hope growing in darkness. Theodore's fingers found the keys, and the melody that emerged was unlike anything Sage had ever heard. It was complex and layered, with themes that wove together like vines climbing toward light. There were passages that spoke of loneliness and loss, but they were always answered by phrases that bloomed with possibility. With the promise that beauty could emerge from the deepest shadows. As he played, Theodore's entire body became part of the music. His shoulders swayed with the rhythm, his face reflected every emotion the melody contained. Watching him play was like watching someone speak in their native language after years of struggling with foreign words. It's beautiful, Sage whispered when the piece came to an end. Did you compose it? I've been working on it since I've been down here, Theodore said. I call it the Garden Suite. It's the story of finding beauty in abandoned places, of learning to bloom despite the darkness. It sounds like falling in love, Sage said softly. Then immediately blushed at her own words. Theodore turned to look at her, his eyes intense in the lamplight. Does it? Sage felt her breath catch as she realized how close they were sitting, how easy it would be to lean just a little closer, and she forced herself to focus on his question, the way the melody keeps returning to certain themes, but each time they're more complex, more beautiful, like getting to know someone and discovering new layers that make you care about them more deeply. Theodore's hands stilled on the keys. Sage, yes. I need to tell you something, and I'm afraid it will change how you see me. Sage felt a flutter of concern. What is it? Theodore took a deep breath. This garden, this sanctuary I've created. It isn't just therapy for me. It's become something more. Over the past months, as I've been growing flowers specifically for your arrangements, as I've been reading your words and understanding your heart through your work, I've been falling in love with you. The confession hung between them like the most delicate flower, beautiful and fragile and precious. Sage felt her heart stop, then begin beating so hard she was sure Theodore could hear it. I know it's impossible, he continued, his words tumbling over each other in his nervousness. I know I'm just a man who lives in abandoned tunnels and grows impossible flowers and can't even exist in the normal world anymore. I know you probably see me as just a curiosity, someone interesting to visit but not someone you could actually. Theodore. Sage placed her hand over his on the piano keys, stopping his anxious words. Look at me. He raised his eyes to meet hers, and she saw in them all the vulnerability and hope and terror that she felt in her own heart. Do you want to know what I see when I look at you? She asked softly. He nodded, not trusting his voice. I see someone who took the worst experience of his life and transformed it into a gift for others. I see someone who speaks fluent poetry in 3 languages: English, music, and flowers. I see gentle hands that can coax impossible blooms from subway soil and create beauty where everyone else sees only darkness. Sage moved closer to him on the bench, her heart racing with her own courage. I see someone who understood my grief better than I understood it myself, who knew exactly which flowers would heal my heart before I even knew it was ready to be healed. I see someone who makes me laugh, who makes me think, who makes me feel alive for the first time in 3 years. Theodore's eyes widened with hope and disbelief. Sage, and yes, she whispered, leaning even closer. I see someone I'm falling in love with too. The moment stretched between them, electric with possibility. Theodore lifted one hand to gently cup her face, his thumb tracing her cheek with infinite tenderness. Are you sure? He whispered. Are you sure you want this? Want me? I come with complications, anxiety, isolation, a life lived in shadows. Theodore, Sage said, covering his hand with hers, I've been living in shadows too. But being here with you, in this incredible place you've created, it doesn't feel like darkness anymore. It feels like we're creating our own light. They moved toward each other with the slow inevitability of flowers turning toward the sun. Their lips met in a kiss that was soft and gentle and absolutely perfect, a first kiss that tasted like hope and possibility. Like the sweetness of night, blooming jasmine, and the promise of gardens yet to be planted. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard, their foreheads resting together as they savored the moment. I can't believe this is real, Theodore whispered against her lips. Believe it, Sage said, smiling. Sometimes the most beautiful things grow in the most unexpected places. Theodore laughed, the sound echoing through the tunnel like music. Did you just quote flower wisdom at me? I learned from the best, Sage said, then kissed him again. This time with more confidence, more passion. Pouring 3 years of suppressed longing into the connection between them. As they kissed, surrounded by impossible blooms, bathed in the warm light of grow lamps that made everything look magical. Sage felt the last walls around her heart finally crumble. For the first time since Elena's death, she wasn't just surviving, she was blooming, and judging by the way Theodore held her, as if she were the most precious flower in his entire garden. She wasn't the only one discovering that love, like the most remarkable plants, could flourish in the most unlikely soil. The next few weeks passed in a dream-like haze of stolen moments and growing intimacy. Sage found herself rushing through her daytime obligations, counting the hours until she could slip away to Theodore's underground sanctuary. Their relationship was blooming like one of his impossible flowers, beautiful, unique, and somehow thriving despite the unconventional conditions. But it was also becoming harder to keep their relationship hidden in the shadows. You're glowing, Janet at the funeral home commented one afternoon as Sage arranged a spray of Theodore's miraculous blooms for a memorial service. I don't know what's gotten into you lately, but you look alive, more alive than I've seen you in the 3 years I've known you, Sage blushed, her fingers gentle on the white roses that seemed to shimmer with inner light. I've just been exploring new possibilities. Well, whatever it is, keep doing it. The families have been commenting on how much more vibrant your arrangements have become. There's something different about them, like they're infused with actual joy instead of just beauty. That evening, as Sage made her way to the hidden entrance to Theodore's garden, she reflected on Janet's words. It was true, everything in her life had taken on a different quality since she'd found Theodore. Colors seemed brighter, music sounded richer. Even her grief counseling work felt more meaningful because she was approaching it from a place of healing. Rather than hollow professional competence, she found Theodore in a section of the garden she'd never seen before. tending to a collection of plants that took her breath away. These flowers seemed to actually emit their own light soft, gentle glows in blues and purples and silvers that created an ethereal atmosphere like something from a fairy tale. Theodore, she gasped, these are incredible. What are they? He looked up from where he was carefully watering a vine covered in star-shaped blossoms that twinkled like tiny galaxies. His face lit up when he saw her, the same expression of joy and wonder that appeared every time she arrived. Bioluminescent hybrids, he said, standing to kiss her hello. The casual intimacy of the gesture still sent thrills through Sage's system. I've been working on them for months. They're a combination of traditional flowering plants with genetic material from bioluminescent fungi and marine organisms. That's impossible, Sage said, moving closer to examine the glowing blooms. Most beautiful things are impossible, Theodore said, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. That's what makes them miraculous. Sage leaned back against his chest, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him. Is that your philosophy on love too? She felt Theodore's sharp intake of breath, felt his arms tighten around her. They had been dancing around the word love for weeks, acknowledging their feelings in roundabout ways but never speaking it directly. Sage, he began, his voice uncertain. She turned in his arms to face him. It's okay, she said softly. We don't have to be afraid of the word. What we have is love. Real, genuine, impossible love. Theodore's eyes searched her face as if looking for any sign of doubt or hesitation. Are you sure? Are you sure this isn't just fascination with something unusual? Gratitude for the flowers. A rebound reaction to grief. Sage placed her hands on his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart under her palms. Theodore Blackwood, she said firmly, I have spent 3 years analyzing every emotion I've experienced. I know the difference between gratitude and attraction, between fascination and love. What I feel for you is deep and real and transformative in ways that have nothing to do with grief or rebound or novelty. She stood on her tiptoes to brush a soft kiss across his lips. I love your brilliant mind that can create living lights in abandoned tunnels. I love your gentle hands that coax impossible beauty from darkness. I love your voice when you play piano, when you explain the properties of flowers, when you whisper my name. Theodore's eyes filled with tears. Sage, I love that you speak in poetry without pretension, that you understand my work without explanation, that you make me want to be braver and more open to beauty. She smiled, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. I love that you've shown me how to bloom in shadows, how to find light in unexpected places. I love you too, Theodore whispered, the words seeming to pour out of him like water from a broken dam. I love you so much it terrifies me. I love your compassion that heals broken hearts, your strength that carries others through their darkest moments, your laugh that echoes through these tunnels like music. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away the tears that had started to fall. I love that you found me when I thought I was lost forever. I love that you see beauty in this strange life I've created. I love that you make me want to stop being a ghost and start being a man again. They kissed then with all the passion and promise they had been holding back, surrounded by flowers that glowed with their own inner light as if the plants themselves were celebrating this moment of truth. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless and shining with joy. I have something for you, Theodore said, his voice slightly unsteady. Something I've been working on since the first night you came to the garden. He led her to a section she'd never seen before, behind a curtain of hanging vines. When he pushed the greenery aside, Sage gasped. It was a small alcove, intimate and perfect, where Theodore had created what could only be described as a shrine to their love. Every flower that had special meaning in their relationship was growing here in careful arrangements: Japanese camellias for deep longing, white chrysanthemums for devoted love, forget-me-nots for true love and remembrance. But in the center of the space was something extraordinary, a single plantain like anything Sage had ever seen. It appeared to be a rose bush, but the blooms were unlike any rose that existed in nature. Each flower was a different color, and the colors seemed to shift and change as she watched: deep red fading to soft pink, purple melting into blue, gold transforming into silver. "Theodore," she breathed, "what is it?" "I call it the sage rose," he said quietly. "I've been working on it for months, trying to create something that could capture all the different facets of who you are. The red for your passion for healing, the gold for your warmth, the blue for your depth, the purple for your wisdom." Sage stared at the impossible flower, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he had created for her. "You made a new species of rose. For me, I wanted to give you something that had never existed before, something as unique as what you've brought into my life." Theodore's voice was soft with vulnerability. "Every flower in this garden has meaning, has purpose. But this one exists only to say I love you in a language that no one else has ever spoken." Sage felt tears streaming down her face as the full impact of his gift hit her. This wasn't just a flower, it was a living poem, a growing declaration of love, a miracle created specifically to capture and express the depth of his feelings for her. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," she whispered. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," Theodore replied. "The rose is just my attempt to create something worthy of you." They sank down together onto a bench he had placed in the alcove, surrounded by the flowers of their love story. The bioluminescent blooms cast dancing shadows on the tunnel walls, creating an atmosphere of magic and intimacy. "I want to tell you something," Sage said, taking his hands in hers. "Something I've never told anyone, not even my grief counselors." Theodore waited patiently, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "The night Elena died, we had fought. A stupid sister fight about. I can't even remember what. She was going out with friends, and I was angry about something trivial, and the last words I spoke to her were harsh." Sage's voice broke slightly. "For 3 years, I've been carrying the guilt of that. The knowledge that she died thinking I was angry with her." "Sage," Theodore's voice was full of compassion, "but being with you, being in this place where impossible beautiful things grow from darkness, it's helped me realize that love isn't diminished by moments of anger, that the totality of what Elena and I shared couldn't be erased by one argument, that she knew I loved her, just like I knew she loved me, despite any temporary harsh words." She looked up at Theodore, her eyes bright with tears but also with peace. "You've helped me understand that healing isn't about erasing the pain or the mistakes. It's about learning to let beautiful things grow alongside them." Theodore pulled her close, holding her against his chest as she let 3 years of suppressed grief and guilt finally pour out of her. He didn't offer platitudes or try to fix anything, he simply held her, surrounded by the impossible flowers he had grown, and let her healing happen in its own time. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "I love your strength and your vulnerability, your professional composure and your human messiness. I love that you trust me with your grief and your joy. I love you too," Sage said against his chest. I love that you've created a world where broken things can become beautiful, where shadows can nurture light, where two people who thought they were lost can find each other and discover they were just growing towards something better as they held each other in the alcove of impossible flowers. Surrounded by Theodore's living declarations of love, both of them felt the deep satisfaction of hearts that had found their home. They were no longer two separate people struggling with loss and isolation. They were a pair, a partnership, a love story that bloomed in shadows and created its own light. What happens now? Sage asked eventually, her voice muffled against Theodore's shoulder. Now we keep growing, Theodore said simply. Together. Whatever that looks like, wherever it leads us, even if it means leaving the shadows eventually. Theodore was quiet for a long moment, considering. With you, he said finally, I think I might be brave enough to try the sunlight again. As long as we can always come back here, to this garden where our love first bloomed, always, Sage promised, sealing the vow with a kiss that tasted like forever and felt like coming home around them. The impossible flowers swayed in the underground breeze, their bioluminescent glow pulsing gently like heartbeats, like promises, like the rhythm of a love that had found perfect soil in which to flourish 6 months later. Sage stood in the sunlight streaming through the windows of what had once been an abandoned greenhouse in Brooklyn, watching Theodore carefully transplant seedlings with the same gentle precision he had always used in the tunnels below. The space was beautiful high ceilings, restored Victorian ironwork, and enough room for both a therapeutic garden and a small performance area where Theodore had begun, tentatively at first, to play piano for small groups of grieving families. The moonflowers are taking well too natural light, he called to her, his voice carrying easily through the airy space. I think your theory about gradual adaptation was correct, Sage smiled, making notes in the journal where she tracked the progress of their joint venture. Shadows and Light Therapeutic Gardens, a healing center that combined her grief counseling expertise with Theodore's remarkable botanical gifts. The transition from the underground sanctuary to this above-ground space had been gradual. Like Theodore's own journey back into the world of sunlight and human contact, they still spent evenings in the tunnel garden, which had become their private retreat, their original sanctuary. But during the day, they worked together in this bright space, helping families process loss through the combination of Theodore's therapeutic flowers and Sage's counseling skills. It was revolutionary work, drawing attention from grief counselors and botanists alike, but more importantly, it was helping people heal in ways that traditional therapy alone couldn't achieve. Dr. Winters. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see Maria Santos, a young mother whose husband had died in a construction accident 6 months earlier. The arrangement is ready. Sage set down her journal and followed Maria to the work table where she had been creating a memorial arrangement using some of Theodore's most special varieties. The woman's hands were steady now as she worked with the flowers, her movements confident and purposeful, a marked change from the shaking, uncertain woman who had first come to them 3 months ago. Tell me about your choices, Sage said gently, settling onto the stool beside Maria. The white roses are for eternal love, Maria said, her voice stronger than it had been in months. The rosemary for remembrance, but not sad remembrance, joyful remembrance of all the good times. And these, she gestured to the bioluminescent forget-me-nots that Theodore had developed specifically for their therapeutic work. These are for the love that continues, even when someone isn't physically here anymore. And how does creating this arrangement make you feel? Maria paused, considering. like I'm having a conversation with him. Like I'm telling him that I'm okay, that I'm going to keep living and loving and finding beauty because that's what he would want for me. She smiled, tears glistening in her eyes but not falling. Like I'm promising him that his love didn't die with him, it grew into something that makes me stronger. Sage felt the familiar warmth in her chest that came from witnessing genuine healing. This was why their work mattered, why Theodore's impossible flowers and her counseling skills had proven to be such a powerful combination. They weren't just helping people process grief, they were helping them transform it into something beautiful. Would you like Theodore to play something while you finish? Sage asked. Maria nodded eagerly. Over the past months, she had developed a deep appreciation for the way Theodore's music seemed to speak directly to the heart, expressing emotions that were too complex for words. Sage caught Theodore's eye across the greenhouse and nodded toward the piano. He smiled and moved gracefully to the instrument, his long fingers finding the keys with practiced ease. The melody that emerged was one of his newer compositions, something he called Phoenix Rising, a piece that began with themes of loss and sorrow but gradually transformed into something triumphant and hopeful. As the music filled the space, Sage found herself marveling at how much Theodore had changed over the past months. The anxious, isolated man she had first met in the tunnels had gradually emerged like one of his own flowers, slowly opening to the light. He still preferred smaller groups to large crowds, still needed the security of knowing he could retreat to their underground sanctuary when the world above became overwhelming. But he was present in ways that would have been impossible a year ago, engaging with their clients, sharing his knowledge of flowers, even accepting invitations to speak at conferences about their innovative therapeutic methods. The anxiety would probably always be part of him, just as grief would always be part of Sage's landscape. But they had learned to tend these difficult emotions the way Theodore tended his flowers, with patience, understanding, and the knowledge that even shadow-dwelling things could contribute to a beautiful garden. Sage. Theodore's voice drew her attention. Maria had finished her arrangement and left with promises to return next week, and they were alone in the golden late afternoon light streaming through the greenhouse windows. Yes? Come here. I want to show you something. She moved to where he stood beside a section of the greenhouse that had been curtained off for the past few weeks. He had been secretive about this area, working on some kind of project that he claimed would be worth the wait, with a theatrical flourish that reminded her of his Broadway days. Theodore pulled back the curtain. Sage gasped. He had created a miniature version of the alcove from the tunnel garden, complete with all the flowers that marked the milestones of their relationship. But in the center, where the sage rose had been, was something even more extraordinary, a small tree unlike anything she had ever seen. The tree was flowering, covered in blooms that shifted through every color imaginable. But as Sage watched, she realized the flowers weren't just changing colors randomly, they were responding to her emotions, her heartbeat, her very presence. When she felt joy, they bloomed golden. When she was moved to tears by their beauty, they shimmered silver. When she looked at Theodore with love, they glowed with warm pink light. Theodore, she breathed, how is this possible? Bioresponsive flowering, he said, moving to stand beside her. It took months to develop the right genetic modifications, but I wanted to create something that would be a living reflection of your emotional journey. Something that would bloom differently for you than for anyone else. Because it's attuned specifically to your heart. Sage stared at the impossible tree, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his love, his creativity, his understanding of who she was at the deepest level. It's It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. It's called the Elena tree, Theodore said softly, because I wanted to create something that would honor your sister's memory while celebrating your healing. Something that grows stronger and more beautiful, not despite the darkness you've experienced, but because of how you've transformed that darkness into light at the mention of Elena's name. The tree's flowers shifted to a gentle lavender, as if it were somehow acknowledging the bittersweet nature of remembered love. Sage reached out with trembling fingers to touch one of the blooms, and it responded by glowing brighter, warmer. She would have loved this, Sage whispered. She would have loved you, and she would be proud of who you've become, Theodore said, slipping his arms around her waist. Of the healing you've done, the lives you've touched, the way you've learned to let love grow alongside loss. They stood together in front of the Elena tree as the late afternoon light shifted and changed around them, painting everything in gold and amber. The tree responded to their joined presence by blooming in synchronized waves of color: deep red for passion, soft pink for tenderness, brilliant gold for joy, and finally a warm, steady white light that seemed to encompass all of their emotions at once. I have something to tell you, Sage said, turning in Theodore's arms to face him. Good news or terrifying news? He asked with a smile. Wonderful news. The National Grief Counseling Association wants us to present our methods at their annual conference. Not just a panel discussion, a full keynote presentation. 3,000 counselors from around the world. Theodore's eyes widened. 3,000 people. I know it's a big crowd, Sage said quickly. Bigger than anything you've done since before. But Theodore, they want to learn from us. They want to understand how we've achieved the healing rates we have, how we've helped people transform grief into growth. This could change how grief counseling is practiced everywhere. She watched his face carefully, ready to reassure him if the old anxiety began to surface. Instead, she saw him take a deep breath, his shoulders straightening with quiet determination. When? He asked. 6 months from now. In Chicago. We would present together. You could focus on the botanical aspects while I handle the counseling theory. And Theodore. We could bring some of the flowers. Show them the real magic of what we do. Theodore was quiet for a long moment, his eyes focused on the Elena tree. The blooms had shifted to a soft blue, as if reflecting deep thought and consideration. 3,000 people, he repeated. We don't have to decide right now, Sage said gently. And if you're not ready, I can present alone. But I truly believe that what we've built together, what we've learned about healing, it could help so many more people. Theodore looked at her, his expression soft with love and amazement. A year ago, I couldn't imagine speaking to one person, let alone 3,000. But look what we've built, Sage. Look what we've created together. He gestured to the greenhouse around them, filled with impossible flowers and the lingering notes of healing music. If our work can help other people find their way from shadows to light the way we have, then yes, we'll do it, together. Sage felt her heart swell with pride and love and gratitude for this remarkable man who had grown so much, who had chosen courage over fear, who had transformed his own healing into a gift for others. Together, she agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss that made the Elena tree bloom in brilliant, joyful gold. As evening approached, they began the familiar ritual of closing the greenhouse and preparing to return to their underground sanctuary. But tonight felt different, charged with the electricity of new possibilities, new adventures, new ways to share the love and healing they had discovered together. Are you ready to go home? Theodore asked, using their private name for the tunnel garden. With you? Sage said, taking his hand. I'm ready for anything. They walked together through the Brooklyn streets as dusk settled over the city, their love as steady and warm as the light from Theodore's bioluminescent flowers. Behind them, through the greenhouse windows, the Elena tree continued to bloom in gentle waves of color, a living testament to the truth they had discovered together, that the most beautiful love often grows in shadows before it's ready for sunlight. That healing happens not in spite of loss, but through the careful tending of whatever grows from broken ground. And that two hearts willing to bloom together can create gardens magnificent enough to change the world. As they descended into their sanctuary, surrounded by 3 years' worth of impossible flowers and filled with dreams of the healing they would share with thousands more. Sage Winters and Theodore Blackwood settled into the peaceful certainty of love that had taken root in shadows and was now strong enough to flourish anywhere. In the distance, soft piano music began to play, the sound of healing, of hope, of love that blooms eternal in hearts brave enough to tend it. And so our story comes to a gentle close, dear listener. Like the flowers in Theodore's garden, like the love between Sage and her phantom florist. May your dreams tonight be filled with impossible beauty, with healing that grows in shadows, and with the certainty that love, like the most miraculous blooms, can flourish in the most unexpected places. Sleep well and let your heart garden bloom.